Hello friends, and welcome to House Call, Falco's place in the metagame, which includes the history, the influence of players versus core mechanics, and matchups as I see them. Today, basically what I really want to do is I want to kind of talk about what's going on with Falco right now as a character, just overall within the course of within context of the entire meta and what it's like now compared to history, and kind of to respond especially to a lot of concerns a lot of Falco players have. And there's just this widespread paranoia. Falco's dying, he's in recession. I'm not playing. I'm not around to play Falco. Mango's not playing very much Falco. I mean, he might more now that Leffen's back and all this sort of thing, but it's still not too much. And then Westballs is starting to use Fox more for floaty matchups like Hungry Box, so we're seeing even less of him. And then even then, when Westballs is playing Falco, he's often inconsistent. So we're not seeing a lot of. So we went from seeing a lot of Falco representation at the top to less representation at the top. And this is leading a lot of people to be concerned. Is Falco going to die? Is the trend going to continue? And today I'm basically going to, and this is going to be a fairly long video. I understand not everyone wants to watch the whole thing. So, the premise of the video is I'm going to try and build the argument throughout the course of the video that Falco is still going to be a top tier, and he's going to remain a top tier for the rest of the time this game exists, but where he will fall within that top tier will be determined somewhat by what the top players are doing, more than the core mechanics of the game. So things like SDI and new combo ideas and things like that will only be able to affect him so much, basically is what I'm saying. And I'll be responding primarily about how the players have shaped Falco within this, and then I'll respond to some arguments against him and things like that at the end. But anyway, let's get into it. So I'm going to start off by talking a lot about history. I'm going to go from around the time I started playing, a little before, in the summer of 2007, up until today, pretty much. And I'm going to hit the stuff I think is really important. And so let's get into it. So like I said, I did start around summer of 2007, and before that, especially before 2006, I have a lot of ignorance. I don't know a lot. This is partly because there weren't so many legendary Falco players. There were some, but they weren't winning tournaments. They weren't taking final spots. They were relevant, but they weren't the exciting types of Falcos that we know about today. The first exciting Falco that we ever saw was Bomb Soldier, and then there were the Florida ones that were kind of inspired by that from that point, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But yeah, before Bomb Soldier and before some of the stuff the Florida guys were putting out, Florida guys being Lamb Chops and Deshizwiz primarily, what we saw from Falco, as Ken said in the Last Stock Legends documentary, is Falco players primarily laser camped a little more. They waited. They went to go with like a Dare or Nair Shine. They just came in and tried to get a hit. If it didn't work, they backed off and lasered some more. And that was their strategy. And since people were really bad at dealing with lasers in the old metagame, I mean, that was enough to take them pretty far, but it still, certainly wasn't good enough. So, camping with Falco was stronger, basically, because there wasn't the idea that he could be a fast player. The tech skill wasn't really there for the game at the time, not even for Fox for a good while. So, some Falcos like DA Dave, Matos, Dope, I don't know. I'm sure there are more, but I don't remember all of them. Yeah, there were plenty. I think there was there were plenty of them. There were quite a few noteworthy Falcos that were older, but none of them made a huge dent in tournaments. None of them had like a legendary kind of reputation. They were pretty good ones, so people knew Falco was a good character, but they didn't consider him like the biggest possible threat to their tournament life. So we see things really start to change for Falco for Bomb Soldier, when Bomb Soldier starts to come onto the scene, which is why he was such a huge deal and so influential. And it's great that there was a documentary made about what he did. And basically, to kind of summarize Bomb Soldier really quickly, is he was a young prodigy, a young Japanese prodigy, and he played Falco in a very technical way, very quickly, with a lot of combos that we still see today that people didn't do back in the day in 2006. And at a tournament Ken went to, who was considered the best player at the time, he went to Japan for a tournament, and Bomb Soldier beat all the good Japanese players who were around the level of top American players, and he gave Ken a terrific run for his money in the finals, and an awesome final set. So Bomb Soldier, really left his mark on the game with just that one tournament, and he just inspired so many Falco players and just generated all this interest in the character and show how fun he could be and how fast the game could be, and it really spurred a lot of interest in the game. And so that was absolutely terrific that he did that. Because he kind of grandfathered in PC Chris, who then did beat Ken, playing faster, and and then he gave more fuel to the Florida players' fire, and they started really making their mark a little bit later on in 2007. When I started playing, Shiz was the premier Falco. PC Chris had already started switching more to Fox. PC had made a name for himself as beating Ken with Falco, but then he had switched to Fox later on, was still finding plenty of success, although he did play many characters. But the Shiz was primarily played Falco, and everyone thought he was just a super fun player, super interesting, very exciting, great combos, great speed. Something you just didn't see much in the game at the time, and he was just inspiring Falco players left and right. And so he was pushing his character far, and then there was also just a huge interest in the character after Bomb Soldier and after the Shiz Wiz and what he was doing that was pushing the character even farther. The placings were improving as a result of all of this newly generated momentum, but it was still too slow, and Melee had been dropped from MLG at this point, so there wasn't a lot of infrastructure to keep it going. And then, of course, Brawl was coming out, so interest was dying off as the Shizwiz was picking up and becoming a very relevant player. And so the farthest Falco got was to be considered fourth on the supposedly final 2007-2008 tier list, and then we were all going to move on to Brawl after that, which didn't really pan out so well, obviously. And I like that tier list fairly well for various reasons, like putting Fox and Marth tied at the top, but that's not really the point. So after to kind of move on from that tier list and talk about what the culmination of everything Falco was at the end of Melee's first peak. Melee dies and then gets revived, and at this point we see Zoo starting to do really well because he was inspired by Bomb Soldier and Shiz. And maybe also PC, I don't remember for sure. And he beats M2K for the first time, Yuzu King for the first time with him at Genesis 1, which was unprecedented because everyone was like, don't play Spaceys versus M2K, it's impossible, there's no way to do it. So just doing that was just incredible, and Zoo just put so much work into the character and everything, pushed him really far, optimized a ton of things, and it was very impressive to see him do that. That was kind of the culmination of all of Zoo's work, in addition to his combo videos, which in turn, the Happy Feet series in turn excited so many more Falco players. So we're seeing so much coming out for Falco right now that you were only kind of also seeing for Captain Falcon a little bit, and you weren't seeing hype for nearly as many characters right now. And I'll talk about why that is in a minute. Zoo also did pretty well against Mango secondaries. He was beating some Mango secondaries for a little while. There are multiple factors. Talking about Mango, he's also developing his Falco after the revival of Melee, and there are many reasons for this. Reasons like he hated Puff Falco, wasn't very strong at the matchup. He liked Falco Dittos, liked Shiz and his playstyle. People said that Mango could only be good with Puff, so he's like, well, I'll show you guys, I'll be good with a bunch of characters, and that's what he did. And it took a while, and his Falco wasn't very pretty for a long time, but that's why it's just so impressive that he was able to do it. But yeah, no, Mango begins to be able to fight M2K, his Sheik, and then eventually his Marth, and they're playing all over the country, and Mango is just continually beating him all over. It was very impressive. And Mango eventually, this is 2009, and then we're getting into 2010, and even a little early 2011 a little bit, where Mango is able to do fairly well against Hungrybox and Armada, Peach and Puff. with Falco. Now he's not beating. This is friendlies, of course, and he's not winning the majority of the games, but he's holding his own quite respectably at times when both of the floaty players, are making pretty much every other Falco player look bad. So we're seeing just a ton of innovation. Mango just innovated so much for the characters he played. I mean, Mango was just very far ahead of the meta at the time, so he just pushed so much for Falco and gave. And in a time when the game was kind of dead and there wasn't a lot of innovation, the stuff that Mango was coming out with took a really long time for people to figure out how to beat because there just wasn't much of a desire to push through it. Interestingly enough, despite this, Falco, people were definitely getting a better perception of Falco as a result of these wins over M2K and things like that. But it was actually Jigglypuff who was considered the best character in the game around this time. And this is because Mango was dominant with Puff from Pound 3, for another year and a half. And then at Pound 4, he beat Hungrybox, and then Mango kind of took a little retirement, so he was kind of Puff through all of that, and he was working on his Falco at the time. From that point, from Mango's little retirement or taking time off or whatever, Hungrybox begins winning everything, and there's Hungrybox's first era, which we've only seen again. We were only seeing the start of again recently, maybe. And Hungrybox is winning everything in 2010. So to see Hungrybox do that well right after Mango, and that's it's over 2 years, 2.5 years of Puff dominance. Many people are saying this character is broken. There's a lot of Puff hate. People didn't. There was some talk of banning her between that and edge camping. And there were various good players and thinkers that were leading this, and I didn't really agree with it, but it was kind of just the way the results were kind of adding up. As there was just a Puff winning all the tournaments, even though there weren't that many taking up any other relevant spots in the bracket. There was one then another winning all the time. To add on to this, Puff had a pretty good rise because Fox and Marth fell off. Super hard. They tanked after Brawl came out and Melee died, and this is those are the two characters that would really be able to check Puff really well. And I have various reasons why I could talk about it for Fox. In my opinion, I think Fox fell off because people didn't want to put on the work as much because you have to keep grinding to be good with the character. We saw him come back right when Melee revived again, and then we saw him be a very dominant character when Melee was thriving the first time. And then Marth, so many good players, Ken, Azin, and others, all just quit with Brawl. They went to Brawl, and then they decided they didn't want to play that as much either. So Marth just really fell off at that point. There just was no new innovation. All the stuff that Marth had that was keeping him ahead of a lot of other characters just kind of got caught up to. M2K wasn't innovating as much. He was focusing more on Brawl, or he was kind of focusing on both and not really bringing everything out because it was just him playing Marth back then. He was starting to switch off of Marth more. So those two characters just fell off incredibly hard. Everyone was starting to lose faith in them over time. People weren't complaining about Marth, weren't really even complaining about Fox very much anymore. It was about Falco and Puff, and primarily Puff for a lot of the time where Melee was dead, which is it's maybe not so weird to think about, but saying that she was definitely the best character and overpowered is still a bit weird in today's thinking, I believe. And then I actually do my part to contribute to changing this conversation a little bit. But I switch between Puff first and Falco second to Falco first and Puff second, with my own rise to the top, where I win a string of tournaments from the end of 2011 through the end of 2010 through the beginning of 2011, ending with Pound 5 in my victory over Armada, and people begin saying Falco's the best. There are certain top players that agree with this, certain ones that didn't. They were saying Falco's the best, and Puff was second, but maybe we should still ban Puff because she could plank or whatever. And so, there's really not, you can't go up much more from here. Falco was considered fourth, and then he was considered second as a result of two other characters falling off primarily. People weren't putting work into them. There was all of this work getting put into Falco as a result of how fun he looked, the combo videos, how exciting he was. Players like Shiz and Bomb Soldier that had these huge reputations that you weren't getting much of in the new age because there just wasn't much stuff to promote the hype and everything. But you could get that with Falco for whatever reason, and so people were really flocking to the character. And a big part of why people said that Falco was the best was kind of like what they said for Puff, is they were like, okay, there's two top players that have Puff, but now Mango didn't play Puff anymore by the time I'd come up. He'd been done with Puff for a while. And so he was playing Falco, and he was starting to experiment with Fox, so he was primarily a Falco player. So there were two Falcos in the top 5 instead of two Puffs now, so people switched their argument. They said Falco's the broken character, he doesn't need to be banned, but he's just really ridiculous and it's dumb. Just a big part, and again, big part of this was there's so much innovation, people were slow to catch up, and we were just staying really far ahead of the meta for various reasons. And again, there wasn't the esports infrastructure, so people weren't trying super hard to figure this out, except for Armada was doing some work on it, and Mango was doing some work on it, and I was doing a little bit of work on it. So I mean, it was just a kind of different nature of things with the more dead game. I didn't particularly agree with the people saying that Falco was the best. And I felt that Fox and Marth need to be fleshed out to understand better. And I mean, in hindsight, I should have talked about Sheik some too. Sheik was getting decent representation. M2K was coming up with a couple of things. Kirby Kaze was doing a great job. This is when he was also starting to thrive in 2010 through 2012. He was on the cusp of becoming a top player, so we were starting to see a lot of really good Sheik innovation from him, but it kind of just didn't pan out, unfortunately. So I didn't, worry about Sheik as much as I did Marth and Fox, who were still not getting very much representation. People didn't really care for that. They just said, there's nothing these characters can do, because it's what they were seeing. The characters, when they were picked at top level, like M2K going Fox and still losing sometimes, or M2K going Marth and still losing sometimes, that didn't work. They're like, okay, well, this means that nothing works. And so they were convinced by that, and that's a similar type of thinking that we still see today, and it's part of what I'm trying to rally against a little bit. Now, I also didn't agree with their argument for Falco being the best, because I was also a Falco pessimist, which is an important distinction. As someone that was primarily playing one character and seeing the flaws of that character and overlooking the strengths, I was still saying maybe Falco's like 4th. I mean, maybe it could even be a little worse. I don't know. I have a lot of doubts about the character. It took me a long time to kind of get over that, but now I accept the weaknesses and strengths of the other characters. I'm more honest about it. I think some of that's come from me playing Marth and having a little bit of time away from Falco to view it more honestly. And, you can see, this is not just a Falco player thing. You can see this with players of any good character, and it's really fun to watch, where they'll just say, hey, this character's harder than everyone says, or whatever. That's just kind of that's a little bit of a funny thing. It's not too relevant, I guess, to the history. So anyway, we're talking 2011 primarily. People are saying Falco's the best. Armada starts winning right after my series of victories. And he wins from Genesis 2, summer 2011, until Apex 2013, January, which is in winter of, which is like January or February of 2013. So he wins for about a year and a half. But that didn't make people think Peach was broken or the best. That just made people think, because like people knew that and Armada talked constantly about how bad the Fox matchup was, and people didn't know it well, and how Peach definitely lost to Puff, stuff that we still see him say today, even though he did, and Hungrybox did beat Armada with Puff, and so Armada was using Young Link by this point. And so some people said, okay, yeah, I mean, he needs a secondary, so I mean, Peach is obviously now broken, and things like that. Armada also helped out the Falco cause a little bit, and he said people were very bad versus Falco. I think Armada is fairly strong at the matchup with Peach. I think he understands the character fairly well, and I think it might just, I don't know, as an interesting thing, because when I went to Europe in 2012 to go there and play Armada primarily, I was playing with the different European players, and although they were weaker on average than the average American player, for their skill level, they knew how to fight Falco better, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I don't really know what to really say about that, but I will say, coming from his own perspective, he did seem to understand Falco pretty well, and he knew that people were kind of overrating the character. and he was still against Puff and Fox as the two problem characters in the game. And so we had a lot of different opinions. Hungrybox didn't like Fox. Thought people vastly overrated Puff. Mango thought Spaceys weren't so good and said Marth and Sheik were the two best characters. I was just underrating Falco and said we need to look at Fox and Marth more. M2K was saying Falco and Puff were still the problems, and Armada was talking about Fox and Puff. So we kind of had a lot of different opinions on the whole thing, but you can definitely tell the overlap there was the primary argument for most people. Like, most people just didn't believe Armada and HBox. I said, no, I mean, Fox can't be the problem. He's not doing well. Like, you're just saying your character is bad. Like, they would use that argument against those players. And they would say, no, I mean, Falco is the problem. Look, we still have two Falcos in the top 5. They're still taking up top spots. No other characters really doing that. And argument still worked, but there was just a lot less focus on, Falco or Puff being ban worthy. There was still a lot of complaints for sure, but it wasn't nearly as bad. And this trend pretty much stayed until EVO 2013, which I've mentioned briefly already. Fox was considered best again at that point, or he was pretty much considered best again right after that, after Mango won with Fox, going all Fox for the first time in a tournament. And this really only got strengthened as esports picked up and everything. Armada switched to Fox. Leffen had switched to Fox like a little while ago because he was a Falco player at one point because he thought that Falco was the best and changed his mind. There was hacks, and Silent Wolf switched from being a tech skill guru to being someone that was trying to work his smarts into the game, and he did that. So there was just a lot of Fox innovation that came with the esports age and everything like that. And so Fox definitely returned to the place of the best character. A lot of the complaints about Puff fell off as Hungrybox began to fall off more. And of course, you couldn't consider Falco the best at this point. You consider him top 2 still, especially with Westballs rising and making Falco more appealing, giving him another place in like the higher echelon of play. But there was just so much Fox that you just couldn't make an argument that Falco could be better. Really, like there were some people that did, but it was much less true. So. To kind of point out a trend real quickly, when the game is thriving, we see Fox just shoot up, and then we also see Marth do pretty well. There's only 2 points of thriving for the game. There was the old era, which the documentary covers, and there's kind of the new esports era. But I think there's just a lot of, and there could be various reasons why Marth didn't pick up as much. Maybe Marth will pick up more later, so maybe we can't comment on that. But the main staying point has been that Fox has been able to thrive regardless. So that's one sticking point. And the other thing is that Falco, when the game wasn't doing well, or when exciting things were happening for Falco, like combo videos or players doing well, sometimes at tournaments, there were more Falco players that were inspired to push the game farther. And comparatively, there weren't as many other players pushing their characters as far, so Falco may have been inflated some, and this is purely by what the players had done, and partly just like the excitement and how we market the game and things like that. And so kind of going back to the history, we see that Falco was considered a top 2 character primarily. Still because of Mango and myself primarily. There was also Westballs, and Zoo was still he'd fallen off a good bit by this point, but he was still somewhat prominent, and he still had some decent wins and things like that. But the conversation really changed about a year ago when I kind of fell out of the game, and Mango stopped picking Falco so much. And since Westballs never was super consistent, he still switched to Fox for some matchups. People said immediately Falco's in danger. And this was not really related to any challenges that Mango and I had in the game. My depression and my health issues were not caused by challenges to Falco as a character, and even if they were, I could still just play Marth, so it doesn't make any sense. And Mango still had Fox, so there should have been no reason for him to also just had his results fall off as hard as he did when he still had like a really good Fox that was able to win Evos and things like that. So I think that this rejects the argument that people often use where Falco can't make it because people are just too good against him now, or they SDI and they power shield everything really well. Like, I just don't think that argument adds up, and that's what we see so much. I think that's just not the common. I don't think that's the correct argument, or the matchups are just too hard and people figured it out more. I just don't think that's the answer, because there just seem to be a lot of unrelated things. Because even when Mango was playing Fox, he was still doing poorly, for example, last year and some into this year. I didn't describe any game mechanics or discoveries for any of the history of what I was talking about, but the perception still changed of the character. And this is primarily due to the players pushing the game, being excited to push the game, but it's hard to separate the people from the game since people play it. And so I am trying to separate this for the people playing the game and the game for the purpose of discussion, but obviously the things are fairly interrelated, and it's kind of hard to tease these things out, which is why things like tier lists are so hard. But I want to say that people are not considering the other side. They're not considering that all these actions, these results from top players that could be due to just outside life factors. People are saying this is completely clearly indicative of the worth of the character, and there could just be other factors there. And I want people to just really, that's like a big point of this video, is I want you just to really consider that. Kind of just to add on to all this, we don't really know what we don't know. So now that people caught up to Falco, there could be other things Falco can do to beat out the new stuff that people are doing against him and things like that, which I believe is the case. I have some ideas for that, but the point is, if the top players are not going to be aware of everything that Falco can do, and they're going to be giving opinions based on either their weakness against him or their strength against him or whatever, and they're not even they're aware that there's more stuff to learn. We have to make sure that we're not talking about how bad the character is when there could just be a new discovery or something that at least just balance things back out when the players are beginning to work hard on the character again. So this is this part is just kind of a let's make sure we calm down a little bit with kind of the pandemonium of freaking out over Falco. To say it clearly, many people say Falco's fall off is due to core mechanics, but I think it's much more due to things like Mango getting lazier, or just having other life stuff affect him, and then me just having health problems being the main issue. And also to consider that Falco's rise was relatively ridiculous compared to how hard Fox and Marth fell off, and how Marth still hasn't even recovered from that. And the fact that Marth is doing a little bit better, people are excited about. Marth, maybe as a character might still not be doing quite as well as Falco, or maybe he's just doing a little bit better, or maybe somewhat better than Falco right now. And we're not saying there's a Marth revolution, but I mean, by the time if we had two Marths in the top 5, which is almost kind of unthinkable in some ways, it would just be ridiculous to kind of talk about all that. If Marths are taking first and second in a tournament, first, second, third, that would just be unprecedented considering how long the character's kind of been dead. Now that was happening in 2005, 2006, 2007. There were just Marths that were all over the tournament results, and they were eating everyone up. And until we see that type of thing again, I don't know if we can really say there's a Marth revolution. But again, I'm saying comparatively, it would just be ridiculous for how long Marth has been kind of dead as a character, not been innovated that much. And so, just kind of keep that in mind, that the characters all have different trends that they're going on for right now for, various reasons, like how exciting people perceive them to be and how much information is out there about them, and how hard the various pioneers of the characters, or like the prominent players of the characters, are working in their life situations and things like that. And so now I will quickly go to some of the mechanical arguments, because I don't want to just completely ignore them. I don't think that's intellectually honest. So at one point, Hack said Falco can't make it, or he will not be able to make it to Melee's endgame due to SDI of combos and power shielding of lasers. For the power shielding of lasers, since I have started playing this game in 2007, I have heard that power shielding lasers beats Falco, and from then until now, I have never experienced that. As my knowledge has grown, there are more ways and more ways to beat it. It does not invalidate Falco's lasers. It does not mean he should stop lasering. It's still a really strong... Now, power shielding is still a really strong tool, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to be something that ends Falco by any means. It's not going to, and it is a good tool, and it's something that limits Falco, and it makes him like have to like be smarter about how he lasers, and this opens up counterplay on the opponent's part. So it's very good. It is a good tool, but it's not something that really is going to beat him as a character. It's not something that anyone can just like do or just even practice and grind out a ton and just be able to beat him. There's just too much counterplay to it. For SDIF combos, this is a relatively new thing. People's SDI, their smash DI has just gotten crazy. It just and so Falco needs to be able to combo more. He doesn't have chain grabs and things like that to punish his opponents, and his grabs are often kind of gimmicky punishes anyway. So that is a better argument, I think, against Falco, and it's certainly a new one, certainly one I don't know about as well. And based on some of my preliminary testing and preliminary thoughts and watching good Falcos, it doesn't seem like that's going to get us. I don't think that's going to stop Falco players. I really don't. And I think there are certain ways to do down airs, certain types of mix-ups and everything like that can make it okay. For an example, for a mix-up, even if, so we say that, Falco runs in down airs and someone SDIs behind him, then he can't get the shine, then he gets out, right? So I believe there are ways around that. But supposing there are not, or supposing there are certain situations that you can't avoid it, then there's a mix-up that occurs, and this can actually lead to you getting a bigger punish. So Mango already takes advantage of this, where he nairs someone, and if they're trying to hold in and get behind him, then they just don't go very far, and he gets a really good combo because they're doing bad DI for the nair, so it's very good combo DI. And so you can start manipulating people really strongly with this and get bigger punishes if you're playing off of what they want to do, if they want to do the most optimal counter to Falco, you can take advantage of it, and it becomes a way to balance risk reward and potentially get even bigger punishes. So I wouldn't outright say that SDI would invalidate Falco anyway. It could make things worse. I think there's still stuff that can be explored there. I think stuff will be explored there, but I don't think it's fair to say that this is going to ruin him right now. Maybe make him a little bit worse, but again, there seems to be room for counterplay too, and that's also something that isn't really being discussed. And I have the same kind of response to matchups. I think a lot of people say that maybe Peach Puff or Ice Climbers could beat Falco. I don't think anyone says that about Falcon, so I think we can all agree Falco beats Falcon. It's a pretty tough matchup. For Ice Climbers, I think Falco, definitely wins that. I think most Ice Climber players would agree with me. One shine from Falco separates the Ice Climbers and they can be killed, whereas it's harder for an Ice Climber player to get a grab on Falco, and Falco edge guards them very well and things like that. And Falco's still hard to tech chase for them to help them get a grab set up and things like that. And Falco laser is still really disruptive for the Ice Climbers and their ground game, and he can disrupt their desyncs with lasers and things like that. So I mean, it's not free. It's still a very complex matchup, but it's I do think that overall Falco has an advantage. I think Puff and Peach are the two I primarily want to talk about because those are the ones that people have least faith in Falco in. I will say for Peach, obviously doesn't look so good with Armada just being Falco's over and over. I do believe that I'll be able to beat him once. It's kind of the same thing for Puff. I do believe I'll be able to show some stuff for Falco that I don't think Mango or Wes are doing or will be interested in doing when I get my health back and I return. I believe Falco wins both of those matchups. I think the Peach one is harder than the Puff one, but I might just not know that as well. And I feel like the big thing for those matchups is Falco's a little bit faster on the ground, and of course he has like the crazy huge mobility, so that those characters can't mess with their air mobility and drift around him very well because Falco has just like a really strong, really fast back air, and so I really think those characters can struggle against him. Falco still hits them hard with down air tech chases. Puff often can't hit Falco as hard unless she gets a rest or a back throw by the edge, which Falco can obviously play around pretty well. And Falco just shouldn't be doing stupid stuff around Puff's shield. And then Peach can hit Falco very hard. I think Falco can hit Peach not always as hard, but sometimes a little bit harder. And I think like the edge guarding and the juggling for Peach isn't really there in the way that Falco's players need right now in order to be able to keep up with her damage output, but I think it's totally possible. And again, partly because even if Falco can't true combo her, Peach can't really avoid dealing with things like Falco's full hop and double jump back air because she just doesn't have the mobility or the moves that hit below her to get around that type of stuff. And I don't think it's exploited as well as it could be yet. or at least not as methodically. It's not to say these matchups aren't fairly close. I don't think Falco counters these characters, but I do think he wins. And I know Hungrybox agrees with me about Puff, and Armada understands my argument for Peach. And I think, maybe with some more fleshing out on my end, he might be convinced of it. And so if we accept that Falco beats Peach, Puff, Ices, and Falcon, and I'm just going to put forward that he goes even-ish with Fox, Sheik, and Marth, because I don't really know the matchups that well. There's a lot of confusing, underdeveloped stuff there on both sides, in my opinion. Then I think it's pretty safe to call him a top tier. So if we know, and so I understand there's a lot to get you to accept for that, and if you have to say that he loses to Peach or Puff or something like that, his matchup spread is still better against the other top tiers, Fox and Sheik and Marth, than those other characters. So I still think you can feel pretty safe calling him a top tier. And so if we know that he's somewhere in first through fourth character in the game, and I happen to believe Fox is the best, which I think most people do, and we say he's second through fourth best character, we can adjust where we think he'll be based on how the meta is going. So if we want to put him at fourth right now, we can. He's not being developed that much. He's not taking up many top spots in tournament. Personally, I think he's probably about third. But we'll see. There's a lot of stuff that can be determined for him, and it's not really being determined right now. No one's really pushing him. No one's really saying, hey, all this stuff that you guys developed while the game was dead, you really need to come up with some new answers, because people have answers for all the stuff you do now. But this is kind of the framework I want to give you and how I'm setting it up, and whether you accept the matchups or not, or accept the arguments for the counter to the character or not, I want you to at least accept that players and how much they're taking up prominent stream time, prominent placings, and things like that is affecting popular perception. But really, Falco might have had an inflated perception for a long time just due to the health of the game and other things like that. Okay, so to kind of summarize, Falco was considered fourth best at Melee's other peak. Then he slowly rose to be considered the best due to the game dying and Falco love being inspired by Shiz and other hardworking innovators. The game resurrected and Fox was considered the best, and Falco has slowly fallen off. This is more heavily lately due to players in the game, so I would advise that you consider this strongly in your reasoning. I feel Falco is second through fourth in the game personally, somewhat independent of the current meta and players, so I use some evaluation of the potential of Falco and how his options, as I believe it, stack up against other characters that are not exploited well yet. For mechanical ideas, all top Falcos have shown he's viable in every matchup, but the consistency hasn't come yet, which is a big deal. So, there's videos of me playing well against Armada's Peach, Smashers Reunion 2012, which is a while ago, but I still think it's relevant. There's me versus Hungrybox for Puff, and then I think me and Westballs have done different strong things versus Ice Climbers over the years. Mango doesn't play that matchup very much. He usually plays Fox in it, so that's why I don't mention him. And I plan to bring the consistency myself when I return, so I would like people to keep that in mind. Everything else we can't be as sure about, but I just don't believe despair is the right option when we have another explanation readily available. And I kind of want to take this moment to say, play who you love. If you think that if you love the character, if you think the character is awesome, if you've seen the character do well and you believe in it, and you really feel like this character is your expression in the game, please, by all means, play them. Because that, the top level is not going to be something that holds you back. It's going to be you that holds you back. So do your best to get up there with whoever you love, especially if it's a top tier like Spacey, Smart, or Sheik, in my view. That you're not going to need a secondary, if at all, or at least for a very long time, until you get to the top level. Play who you love, and I really think that's going to do you way more good than worrying about exactly how a character is doing at the super top level right now, because that it does, but I don't know if it should affect the entire perception of the whole community of the character, if that makes sense. And I think that's about it. I've covered the history, I've covered some of the arguments, and I've covered a little bit of the history of the other characters for balance. So I hope this gives people some good things to think about, and think about Falco more holistically in our conversations in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and let's do our part to get the beak back to its peak.